Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel, Camerasweets. I appreciate you taking the time to come on over and listen to what I have to say. If you or someone you know is suffering from PTSD, depression, anxiety, or often filled with uncomfortable emotions like guilt, embarrassment, and shame, this series is for you. Today we're going to talk about 10 mental health resources that could instantly help you. But first, here's a little background on why I needed to use these resources. My name is Kelly Brennan, and I am a 36-year-old sister, daughter, and wife, born and raised on Long Island in New York. I have faced various forms of abuse and neglect throughout my life, starting at about age 5 with molestation. That was followed by more sexual assault at the hands of a different person. Later, I endured physical and mental abuse and neglect during my adolescence due to a loved one's mental health issues. Turning to teachers, coaches, and other trusted adults in my teenage years, I looked for help and validation. Instead, they made things worse by taking advantage of my vulnerable state. In 2003, I was introduced to Jeffrey Epstein and a few of his friends. Epstein conned me into trusting him through lies and manipulation, which only led to more sexual assault, torture, rape, stalking, threats, and causing my mental health to deteriorate further. Suffering from untreated PTSD and low self-esteem for nearly 2 decades, I surrounded myself with the people I thought I deserved, unknowingly moving from one abuser to the next. In 2020, after the Netflix documentary aired, my world was turned upside down as I learned about Epstein's other victims and that I was nearly sex trafficked all those years ago. Deciding to finally face my demons, I contacted the FBI, hired lawyers, and told my family about the abuse I had endured throughout my entire life. However, doing so turned out to be way more than I could mentally and physically handle. The combination of public interest, media coverage, and the persistent, never-ending PTSD symptoms that plagued my mind, body, and soul had severely impacted my overall well-being. I could not cope appropriately, and after hitting rock bottom, I only continued to sink lower, outmatched by this situation entirely. Finding myself in crisis mode, I knew that I needed to stem the bleeding. I needed help, and I needed it fast. However, I struggled to find suitable resources. Getting help and finding efficient and effective resources was too challenging and overwhelming, which extended my recovery process and nearly forced me to give up on more than one occasion. To make that process easier for anyone else still suffering today, in part 1 of this series, I provided a list of 10 mental health resources that dramatically impacted my overall well-being. I set the scene. I will put the link to the associated article to part 1 in the description below. Now, in part 2 today, I will dive into the first 5 resources outlined in part 1, and there will be an upcoming video for part 3, which will talk about the remaining resources. Before I go any further, I just want to state that this is not an advertisement. I have not received any compensation for making this video or the associated article, or advocating the use of the products and services named within. Additionally, I am not a medical professional or expert. Everything stated in this video and the corresponding article are based on my personal experience and knowledge. If you feel you may hurt yourself or someone else, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Line, 800-273-8255. Now, let's jump in. Wisto. Now, this is from their website. Using the power of online human connections as a force for good, Wisto provides a meaningful alternative to mainstream social media networks by connecting people to others who can truly get them since they've been in their shoes and are ready to offer non-judgmental support and encouragement. And you can learn more about them at wisto.com. So now, my experience and the reason why I added this was because Wisto really did play a very integral role in my recovery. Unable to join a traditional support group because of the COVID-19 pandemic had caused a mandatory lockdown, I was alone with endless hours to contemplate my situation and second-guess myself. After downloading the Wisto app, I connected with groups and individuals that had faced similar experiences. The acknowledgement, advice, and validation that others provided as I shared details about my trauma were invaluable. The app helped me feel less alone and gave me the confidence to continue my journey to a healthy mental state. Although family and friends were helpful and did their best to support me, the people utilizing this app were familiar with what it felt like to walk in my shoes. And just so you know, I wrote that before I read what Wisto had on their website. As my PTSD symptoms flared dramatically, especially hypervigilance and flashbacks, they were out of control, Wisto became the lifeline that grounded me in reality. The empathy and understanding I received from other users were exactly what I needed to heal, especially when first confronting my past. When you're first acknowledging abuse and neglect or, of any kind or mental health issues, you start to doubt your sanity. You wonder if it's just you. You wonder if you should be justifying it or if you're justifying things too much. So the ability to talk to people in a safe manner using an app like this made it extremely easy to get that validation that I needed. Now, here are some tips and tricks that I learned along the way. As I healed, instead of using the app to vent or ask for advice, I found myself responding to others frequently. At times, doing so was more therapeutic than asking for help, and I highly recommend that users do the same. As many survivors do, I struggled with acknowledging that my experience was considered abuse, frequently shrugging it off and justifying what happened. When that wasn't the case, I blamed myself, removing guilt from my abuser and the need for further action. I internalized my negative feelings. However, through the healing process, I have concluded that as humans, we judge others harsher than we do strangers, and this was very apparent when using the Wisto app. When reading and providing advice to others enduring similar experiences, the situation was so clear to me. I could quickly identify the abuse and understand that the victim did not deserve what happened. I could offer advice, yet for myself, I just couldn't see it. However, after repeatedly comforting survivors with the same platitudes that they often sent my way, I was able to accept my past and move forward. As I kept saying things like, "You're not broken, it's not your fault, you're going to be okay, you're not alone," all those things which I had heard previously from other users that were, nice enough to offer me their support, it didn't sink in. I couldn't understand, especially when we got down to the nitty gritty of, what's considered abuse or why. It's like I understood it and I knew the things I had went through were abuse, but we justify and we don't want to admit that's been our life. And it's shocking. And eventually, after hearing it over and over and over, but then saying it to others, I was able to understand and it sunk in. Something else, just a quick tip that I want to add in here, is with mental health, people often shrug off their symptoms as well as with abuse. However, like I said, we don't do that for strangers. So a quick tip is if you're not sure about something, I see all the time on the Reddit forums, is this rape? Take your situation and now pretend that someone else is saying that same thing to you. Think of your niece or nephew or your best friend or your sister or your mother and pretend they came to you with that same exact situation. What advice would you give them? How do you feel about it? Is it abuse? Doing that allows you to kind of step out of your own comfort zone and your own bubble to see things from another perspective. And we are often, as I've said several times now, we are often kinder to strangers than we are ourselves. If somebody would have described the situations that I had been in, I would have seen it as abuse. I would have tried to help them. I would have offered solutions. Yet for myself, I was too immersed and I couldn't see it. So with that being said, like I said, I highly recommend Wisto. Now, moving on to BetterHelp. According to their website, their purpose is making professional therapy accessible, affordable, and convenient so anyone who struggles with life's challenges can get help anytime and anywhere. And you can go to betterhelp.com if you would like to know more. Specifically, my experience. BetterHelp was an effective and efficient resource that drastically improved my overall well-being, allowing me to make more progress quicker than I had during previous unsuccessful attempts at therapy. The ability to participate in video conferences and chat sessions created a physical distance that had a surprisingly positive impact on the overall atmosphere, making me feel safer and more in control. The technological platform had a similar atmosphere to text messaging and posting on social media, creating a familiar environment and inadvertently making it easier to share and skip the pleasantries and shyness that typically consume the first several weeks, if not months, of therapy. We were able to kind of jump right in. Furthermore, having the ability to participate remotely made it challenging to justify canceling the appointment at the last minute because all I needed to do was sit on the couch and click a button or two. This had become an issue in the past due to the anxiety that would flare in the hours before therapy. Previously, as I would sit there and think about the things that I wanted to discuss during therapy, anxiety would set in. And because when I would get to the appointment, I would try to say those things. And even though the logical side of my brain was internally screaming at myself to speak up, to say those things, to ask, I just could never bring myself to do it. And before I'd know it, that moment would pass and I'd move on to something else. And it was infuriating. But I hadn't discovered yet that talking about certain trauma, especially the things that happened with Jeffrey Epstein, was triggering in itself. Because I had been threatened, stalked, I found a man in my closet. I mean, there was a lot of things that happened there. I was so afraid of what would happen if I told somebody, that just the act of telling somebody or thinking about telling somebody would cause me to become triggered. I sweat. And when I say sweat, I mean like sweat. It's like a different kind of sweating. I'd get overly sensitive, my hands would shake, my heart would race, and it just became so overwhelming that I would come up with a reason. Oh, it's raining, I can't drive there, I'm not feeling well today. I could go on. And having this app where all I had to do was have my phone on me and press a button or two, it really removed the ability for me to justify canceling. There was no reason to really ever cancel. Now here's some tips and tricks that I learned when using BetterHelp. Using BetterHelp allowed me to discover that I found it much easier to write about traumatic experiences like abuse, child molestation, and rape rather than communicate verbally. When face-to-face with a therapist, feeling too uncomfortable, silence typically enveloped me as I shut down, causing my brain to go blank and making it nearly impossible to find accurate words. When writing, I could take my time crafting a message and finding the exact words needed to express myself. Even during the live sessions, words flowed easier as I typed, and I didn't waste as much time fiddling with my fingers while staring at the floor like I would have in an in-person therapy session. I used the chat feature in BetterHelp between sessions to jot down concerns, intrusive thoughts, and epiphanies, allowing me to compartmentalize and focus on everyday life when needed. Knowing that someone would eventually read what I had to say, and that we discuss it during our next therapy session helped decrease my nightmares, flashbacks, and intrusive thoughts. I hadn't known that I had PTSD while I was going through this. I didn't know what compartmentalizing was, or triggers, or, and having an issue with Jeffrey Epstein. Even when I tried to escape and just find some entertainment, he would be mentioned in the nightly shows that I watched. He was on Netflix. I can't tell you how many times I would just click the Netflix button and then suddenly his face would be on my screen. It was overwhelming, to say the least. And I didn't know how to shut off those intrusive thoughts. It was constant. When I mean constant, I mean every moment of every second for days. And every time I would finally get that voice in my head or those thoughts in my head about what had happened, it was, to kind of simmer down a bit, I'd get triggered again. And this was the first way that I had learned, kind of by accident, thanks to BetterHelp, that writing down what I had to say, especially in the beginning when I was having this issue, in the BetterHelp app, it helped I was able to kind of take those intrusive thoughts right out of my head and place them in the app and say, okay, we'll discuss that later. Number 3, let's jump into the mental health tests app. Now, the purpose, to find out if you have a mental health issue. Taking a self-administered mental health test is one of the quickest and easiest ways to determine if you are experiencing symptoms of a mental health condition. Tests are available for depression, anxiety, adult ADHD, PTSD, alcohol, substance abuse and addiction, eating disorder, gambling addiction, mania, narcissism, postpartum depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, panic disorder, social anxiety, and a whole bunch more. Just a quick note, the tests available within this app have typically been created and standardized by the mental health care community. They are widely accepted amongst medical professionals. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to mind-diagnostics.org, or it's much easier if you just go into your app store and search for mental health tests app. Now, my experiences with the app. When I first started to acknowledge the trauma I endured, my brain often attempted to justify what happened. I'd flicker between accepting the trauma and then denying it altogether, often sharing details with people, only to later recant my thoughts and opinions. After decades of doing so, the habit was challenging to break. Using this app gave me the courage to finally reach out to a medical professional, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. It was using the Plush Care app. I was able to contact them to discuss medication and other possible solutions. Having a tangible document that effectively stated that I was at high risk of suffering from PTSD, depression, anxiety, and panic disorders made the diagnosis something that I couldn't deny. After my concerns were validated, it became much easier to discuss my symptoms and everyday struggle with therapists, but more than that, it gave me the courage and proof I needed to confide in loved ones. And later on, I'd obviously realized I never really needed proof, but before that, again, we justify our feelings and we second guess ourselves. And so, especially if you have loved ones or family members that believe the negative stigma that's attached to mental health, think that you can just, through sheer will, you can get over things like this, or it's that you're being a wimp or not strong enough or lazy. This was something that you could literally print out and have in your hand, something tangible that said, hey, look, according to this medical diagnostic questionnaire, I need help. Some tips and tricks that I learned while using this app. The tests within the app are typically the same questionnaires that your doctor uses to determine if you should be diagnosed and treated for a mental health disorder during an in-person visit. Completing the test before my appointment gave me the validation I needed to follow through with the appointment. Basically what I'm saying is without doing the test before the appointment, I hesitated whether to even make an appointment and see a doctor. No less, I probably would have canceled or chickened out or talked about something else during the appointment. Knowing the results also allowed me to prepare questions and requests ahead of time. Additionally, since I received an email copy of the results, I could easily print, save, or email it to the doctor. This feature was incredibly convenient to use in conjunction with the Plush Care app. I'll get into that a little bit later. Furthermore, consider using this app even if you've already been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. I often utilized it and continue to utilize it to track my progress and warn me if my PTSD and other symptoms were no longer appropriately managed. It would prompt me to address the situation rather than just write it off. Because I've lived more than 3 decades with a mindset that has now in the last 2 years been changed to viewing myself and life in a much healthier manner, it's easy to slip back into old ways. But more than that, because things had been so terrible, I hate to say it that way, but things it had gotten really dark for a while. Since they were so terrible and now I'm doing better, I justify that everything's fine because I'm better than I was. However, that doesn't mean I'm as healthy as I could be. So taking these tests, like once I remember thinking, I'm doing much better, and I took the test and I realized, well, no, I'm still struggling. And that prompted me to get a medication change. And then I found out, wow, this is so much better. And the thing is, when you've never fully lived healthy in a healthy manner or had a healthy mindset, you don't really know what it's like to have one. So this helps even after you've been diagnosed, because it helps you gauge where you're at as far as being mentally fit. One other thing I want to add that is not mentioned in the associated article is that this also helped me when I was assisting loved ones, family and friends, with their own struggles. Because we often justify, and they may have been in the same position I was, where I never really knew what it was like to have a healthy mindset. They might not realize, and they might be writing it off, and they may be suffering for unnecessarily suffering. Either sending them the link to this app, or at times when I was physically with the person and they really weren't going to do anything on their own, I actually opened it up myself and I said, hey, listen, just humor me. Just let me ask you these questions, give me an answer. And then I had it emailed them the results. Number 4, Plush Care. Now, according to the website, the purpose is virtual primary care and mental health treatment when you need it. Speak to a top doctor and get personalized, high-quality healthcare from your desktop or smartphone. And you can learn more about them from plushcare.com, or you can download the app on your mobile device. My experience with Plush Care, it really played, and still actually to this day plays, an integral role in my mental health. So admitting to myself that I had PTSD took longer than it probably should have. And when I finally did, for some reason, I felt embarrassed, confused, but more than all of that, I was really unsure of what to do next. My PTSD symptoms flared every time I told someone about my experiences with Jeffrey Epstein, making it challenging to physically say the words rape or sexual assault, no less provide details about what happened and how it impacted me. I'd stand there, internally yelling at myself, demanding and begging that I speak up before eventually changing the subject. As my heart raced, my throat became dry, and my ringing filled my ears, making it difficult to concentrate, and I would sweat profusely. This made it impossible for me to find the words. It's like my mind would go blank. However, using the app created a barrier between myself and the doctor, decreasing my PTSD symptoms. I guess because we weren't in the same room and I didn't have to worry about it's awkward. I can't look people in the eye, and you know that you should, and it's weird, and it just makes you feel like you're being judged, and I can't even explain it. Even if the doctor or whoever you're telling isn't saying anything negative, and they're doing everything they should and being supportive, you just feel so small and vulnerable and watched. Moreover, knowing that I could simply excuse myself and hang up the phone if I suffered a flashback or felt things had become too much to handle made me feel more in control. Worst case scenario, I could just delete the app even and never talk about it again. I also want to say that I've had experiences with young women and men that have been sexually assaulted or abused, or facing depression, anxiety, whatever it may be. However, they're still on their parents' insurance, and therefore they get nervous to, seek medication or seek other resources by seeing a doctor. Especially, I had 1 or 2 people that live in a very small town. Even though there's patient confidentiality, even if the doctor doesn't say anything, underneath your parents' insurance, your parents will still receive, a summary at the end of the year or directly after that kind of states what the insurance is paying for. So because of that, like I said, I've actually experienced this more than once. When I explained what Plush Care was, and it's not that crazy expensive, depending on, I guess, your income and what you're doing, but it gave them the opportunity to go through Plush Care, not use their health insurance, and still get the help they needed without the judgment from, their family or, them finding out about sexual abuse, things like that. Now, some more tips and tricks. When booking, the app provides areas for the patient to describe the reason for the appointment and to upload documents. Because I often had trouble bringing up mental health and sexual assault subjects with a doctor, I used the description to set the scene, explaining that I had been sexually assaulted and found it difficult to cope. After using the mental health tests app, which I just described previously, I'd receive the results via email, save it, and upload it to the Plush Care app. Oftentimes when I would make an appointment, want to bring it up, and then wouldn't have the nerve to actually do it. So this made sure that I was going to meet my goals and discuss this and find solutions. Furthermore, if you have a loved one suffering, this app may help. It played a crucial role in convincing several family members and friends to finally get the diagnosis and treatment they desperately needed, but were too afraid to take the necessary steps to receive. Following the similar steps I just mentioned before, I'd book the appointment for them. I described their situation, concerns, and questions and desired results, and attached the mental health test app results while making their appointment. After doing this a few times, I learned that it was necessary to set healthy boundaries with the doctor at the start of the appointment or within the description. Simply stating what I was and was not comfortable discussing and potential triggers were helpful for the doctor while also helping me avoid a negative situation. The Notes app. Now, yes, I'm talking about the Notes app that typically comes already installed on your mobile device. The app generally aims to type and save whatever information you want to draft in it. It has features to easily share or copy the document. The simplicity of the app and the fact that most people carry their phones with them make it an easy solution for journaling and creating lists. Now, my experience. Once the Netflix documentary aired and the public interest in Epstein peaked, I often became triggered without warning. It forced me to acknowledge my trauma for the first time after it had time to compound and fester for decades. Doing so was akin to opening Pandora's box, often flooding me with an overwhelming amount of emotions, thoughts, and opinions. It's like I opened it up, and after feeling almost nothing for years or being a muted, dull version of myself, it's like all those emotions that I repressed and were down there, it's like they all came out at once and I could no longer control them. When I got upset, I got upset. Or when I felt nothing and I dissociated, I felt nothing. It was so extreme. And because of this, I had an extremely challenging time compartmentalizing the trauma, making it nearly impossible to function as a human being at times. At first, I used the BetterHelp app journaling feature to write down my thoughts and share them with my therapist, as I mentioned before. When I did, I knew it would eventually be read by a medical professional and that whatever I wrote about would be discussed at our next session. Recognizing that there was no further action needed that I could do at that moment, the negative intrusive thoughts were pushed to the side temporarily and stopped playing on loop within my head indefinitely. Eventually, as I moved away from using BetterHelp, I used the Notes app to help with this process. Doing so gave me more control over the data, making it easier to organize my thoughts and quickly move from one topic to another. I used the Notes app because it helped me create a list throughout the week or as things happened that I could say, oh, this is infuriating, or this made me so sad. And I would add it to the list, and there's a nice little share feature, and you can copy it, and then I'd paste it in the app or just have it in front of me when I was in therapy. And it helped me because one of two things happened. I went through that list, and by the time I went to therapy, half of them didn't matter anymore, which made me realize that in the moment, even though something is super upsetting, and give it a few days, give it a week, it may not even be worth discussing anymore. So instead of reacting and, like I said, my emotions were out of control, I could say, all right, it's going to be, dealt with when I'm in therapy, compartmentalize it, deal with it later. And that's much easier said than done, but it worked for me. So tips and tricks for using the Notes app. I'm not always the best at communicating with others or understanding my emotions, as my feelings typically unfold over time. Writing about my concerns, fears, and experiences in the app helped me process and accept what happened. I'd often reread what I wrote directly after, fine-tuning the words to depict exactly what I wanted to say. I still find myself rereading old notes, reflecting on my progress and how much I've changed. Sometimes when things seem unmanageable and I feel too exhausted to go on, I review my journal entries from times when my PTSD symptoms were uncontrollable. They remind me that things could always be worse and prove just how much progress I have made. Other times, I reread the emotional, motivational text from the days when I felt particularly proud of myself. I can't stress enough how writing helped me process. The ability to reread things, where I don't know whether this is right or wrong or indifferent, it's just my experiences. As I reread it, it desensitized me. It made it so that those words weren't so difficult to say out loud anymore. I don't think I'll ever be over it or I'll ever be cured, of PTSD. I don't know if you ever are, but it definitely helped. But more than that, as I chose the words, it wasn't just, as I went through and edited it and fine-tuned it, it wasn't just finding the words so that I knew what to say. It really made me think about how I felt, and writing it and fine-tuning it helped me evolve into my overall feelings about it. So I just want to say thanks again for taking the time to listen to what I have to say. I really appreciate it. Again, sorry to say it, but if you haven't taken the time to follow me, share all this information, I'd really appreciate it if you took the time to do it. It really does help. Thanks again. This is Kelly Brennan. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out, everybody.